While we're waiting, why don't we go ahead and get started and introduce ourselves so we can get this show on the road. Thank you all for coming. So I'm Jennifer Gravitt, and I represent District 4, which is parts of Weber County and Davis District. Let's just go around the room.
I'm Gina James. I'm with Utah Association of Public Charter Schools.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jones. I'm with the Utah Education Association.
Jamie Robinson, a preschool through secondary specialist at USC.
Smith, preschool specialist here at USC.
Leah Longhurst, director of career and technical education here at USC.
Sarah Young, implementation coach here at the agency.
Ashley Higgs, education specialist for career and technical education.
Richard Oppie with Qualtrics. Mahoney Kakanos with Qualtrics. And Matt this with Qualtrics.
The Qualtrics Corner.
I'm Norman, Deputy Superintendent, Student Chief.
Okay, Mark Marsh, I'm a new board member, second whole month on the job.
You're a veteran.
I'm a veteran. After an 11-hour meeting.
That's right.
I'm a veteran.
Yeah.
But anyway, I represent District 12, most of northeastern Utah in that corner.
Norley Grant, and I am the committee secretary.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Okay, we'll take that.
And call again.
Scott Hanson, District 2.
For assistance.
Janet Cannon,
District
8.
Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and start with agenda item number 2. It's an information item. So we're going to go ahead and have Jamie come on up to the table and anyone else you need. And you're going to give us an update on the early childhood standards process that was provided to us in June. And you feel so far away, but I'll let you go ahead and give us that information, and then we'll ask questions as needed.
I just wanted to let you know the updates that we have made throughout the summer. We've been working on the early childhood standards, and we provided you with a document, and I was just not sure if you guys had any questions that we could address for you.
Okay. Give committee members a second to get those things up.
I have paper copies if anybody wants those too.
While they're looking, maybe just give us an update on when did they meet, when are they meeting next, etc.
So we had 5 meetings during the summer, and then we had a meeting, so 1 in June, 2 in July, 2 in August, and then we met September 4th. We have another meeting coming up on Monday, and another meeting on September 17th, hoping to get a draft to you in October of the early childhood standards.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that Jamie has shared with us for additional background information is the fact that all of the youth standards are approved at once. Whereas in other areas, we have the language arts, we have the mathematics, we have science. All of these are approved at once. So an educator is responsible to do all of these. Then content areas. The other piece of that Jamie had shared with us is, can you talk to us really quick about the range of who receives these standards?
Great.
Yes. So the early childhood standards are developed and they're used throughout like private preschools, they're used in homes, they're used in center-based, and they're also used in the LEAs. And so we have a wide variety of educational background, and we also have a wide variety of service models. So some of those students may be in like a center-based program for 8 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours a day. Some may be in a LEA where they have a 2-hour program twice a week. And so with these standards, we ask them to please make sure that they have the essential elements. And then our hope is that with the core guide, we'll be able to expand ideas of how they can reach those standards.
And I wanted to ask you, Jamie, is it a burden to have to do all of the standards at once? Is it a burden to our teachers? What would be something to help that?
It is actually a high lift, because you're not just taking the science standards and starting with the science over again. You're taking all content areas and having them reformat their whole entire day.
Yeah,
so it is
awful.
A pretty big burden on our early childhood teachers. And so one thing that we've kind of been tossing around that I've talked about is maybe at some point looking at adopting as standards come through, and we've been working through the standards revision process, and that's been something that's been coming up with you guys. And so as they come up for review, possibly embedding preschool in that section So social studies will be the next one that's coming up, so maybe including, and with the social studies standards that we created, the last standards are so old, you guys have heard that, I'm sure, that instead of going off of those standards to kind of look at what 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds might do, we have created new social studies standards. But maybe when social studies comes up, or English language arts, which will be the subject or the content area after social studies, embedding the standards to include preschool instead of recreating a whole entire document that asks them to switch out all of their curriculum at once.
Well, I think we should direct staff to do that, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. With that, we try our best to get like the content specialists involved in the standards,
Yeah.
but because we're like meeting so often and we're trying to juggle all of them, it's really difficult. So I think we would also, it would be a huge value to the standards if we could, involve and be with the specialists as they're revising all of the standards, to really have, that they would be involved in the preschool standards a whole lot more, and it would help with that alignment all the way through. And again, it's been interesting in the agency. Everyone has been like, why do you guys have a separate document? And I've been wondering the same question. So we'd love to be included. Have pre-K through 12 standards. So
would there be any unintended consequences that we can think of that would? I mean, we've been doing it this way for some time, and now we're talking about making a change. It seems to make sense to me too. Can anyone think of any downside to doing it?
I think the only thing would be like retraining the field, that like they're no longer in one document, that you need to access them online in the separate areas. But I think, and again, as Board Member Grau was saying, right now we're going to release these standards, and preschool teachers are going to have to look at their entire day. Whereas if we go by subject area and content area, then they're just adjusting their science 1 year or adjusting their ELA 1 year. It's more manageable.
So the field's probably ready for it.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
So thinking about the mechanics of it, though, so we'd have an inclusive document that has everything in it, right now, and then gradually we would say that this part of this standard takes the place of this.
Like when social studies comes
Right,
up,
we'd
we're
say,
gonna check
okay,
that.
this is no longer valid in social studies, so we'd have kind of that process to think through how we're going to do that. But
kind of some ideas that I've had with that have been that as we come up with the different standards on the early childhood standards page, we can send out a revision to them and let them know. Like in English language arts, it is now included in this area. This is where you can find it. But then also on our website, instead of having the standards show up on our website, saying,
superseded.
please see this section on our website.
Just link.
Great idea. I think Board Member Cannon has a question.
Yeah, so I was just thinking in my mind that we've looked at a lot of standards, and so you've given us this little information here. I'm just wondering what they look like when they come out. Do they have strands? Do they have descriptors? Does your document essentially reflect what the other standards look like at this point in time, or if we go this route, I guess they will ultimately.
Right.
But what would we expect to see when we get this final document? Will it be the same or will it differ?
I have been directed to try to make that look as similar to the other documents as possible. So we have taken the idea of where you have the standard, this is the grade level that you're working on, this is the content. So if it's reading, there may be an R there, and then strand, this is the first standard objective. So that will be the same, and then underneath each standard will go underneath that strand, and there's like a description of what that strand means in preschool. And so the document, the way that I am intending for it to look at this moment, and I will take any direction that you guys like, is that we're thinking about having an introduction, and then we would have a section for 3-year-olds that would go through all content areas, a section for 4-year-olds that would go through all content areas, and then kind of a vertical alignment, because there are some classrooms out there. Some are lucky enough to just have 3-year-old classrooms and 4-year-old classrooms, but some have 3- and 4-year-olds in the same setting. And so it would be nice for them to have a vertical alignment that they can see, like, here's my 3-year-old, here's my 4-year-old, and this is how they connect from one to the other.
Sorry to interrupt. We have to pause the meeting because the streaming is down.
Okay.
So, talk among yourselves.
I would like to talk about dessert.
Oh, dessert. Somebody say? Somebody say?
But Scott didn't realize that you could just record it on there.
We can. That's covered. Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, kids, stop talking among yourselves. I think, Jamie, you were in the middle of it.
Where was I at?
There we go. Action. bell has rung.
So, talking about how we wanted to set up this
Yes.
book itself, do you guys have any questions about how we want to set it up, or is there a specific format in which you would like us to present to you?
Well, and where did Jennifer go? I think we had talked about having consistent templates, a consistent format, and I wonder if you maybe could speak to that. Pretty please.
So in teaching and learning, since we do a lot of curriculum standard or core standards, we've talked about trying to support our staff as well as board members with having consistency among the tools we use. So we have teams broken out to work on each of the steps of the standards revision process, and they are developing templates for each step. So that we have a different team taking on standards like ELA next year. The templates will be made, and they can just use them for their content. And so in the next couple of months, we should have that done so that as we progress through, there'll be templates for them to use. That if you don't like that template, you'll want to speak because you'll keep seeing that template. We'll definitely want your feedback as we start the process of trying to build consistency and more of a support mechanism for our staff as well as board members, so you're not having to figure out, well, Ricky did his implementation plan this way, and Jody did hers this way, and now you have preschool saying they're doing it this way. It just kind of loses the consistency for the field as well of what to expect. So ultimately, it kind of goes to all stakeholders involved, but we are working on that. We started in our staff meeting last on Tuesday, and we'll work on that every couple of weeks until we get it done in our team. So.
And you'd be working with Jamie on that.
Yes.
Oh, I think that's
she's in a team.
Well, I don't know because preschool teachers are. So thank you.
We learned how to share and play
I know. Do board members have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing
I am too.
what comes out.
And I know we weren't super clear, but I'm wondering if we can begin that process of, seeing what it'd be like to have the standards done. And so maybe have it be an agenda item, come back to us, and so we can look at that. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just had a quick question. When we bring the standards to you, would you like them to be in like the format that all the other standards are, or would would you also like the vertical alignment, or would you just so both format?
Yeah.
Cookies.
Just wanted to
please.
yes. Will do.
Oh, thanks, you guys. You're great.
She'll bring the cookies, I'll bring the milk. We'll have your desserts covered.
Teachers have it. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you. Great. So we're going to go down to, I think since we're still push up, we're going to do item number 3. That's okay. Do we need to wait for Jeff? So, lawn licensing. So this is going to be a fun meeting. Let's do 5 and 6.
Every time you change that, I have to go back.
I know,
and
it's
it takes
really
you to the very top. You have to go all the way back down.
That's going to be Qualtrics corner. I had to work on that for a second. Okay, so let's do action item 5, R277623, the school climate survey. I think, Jennifer, are you going to talk to us about that, and Sarah?
So Rhett
is
going to be the school climate component.
Okay, and then you guys are.
But actually, since Jeff wrote that rule, if it would be possible for us to do educator exit first, would that be?
That would be fun.
Because I think we're missing personnel still.
Yeah, we'll work it. We'll make it work. Okay, so to clarify, we're going to do the exit first, which would, with Civic Clerk, I feel like I'd burn a lot of calories with my fingers. I have to go to item number 6. Okay.
So I know when Jeff prepared the rules, there is some parallel between 5 and 6, or your item 5 and 6, between the educator survey and the climate survey. So just keep that in mind as we talk about this. If changes are made to one, it'll probably affect the other.
Good.
So in legislative session, we were charged with developing an exit survey to understand why teachers are leaving the field, that LEAs would be charged with administering to each teacher that was leaving to the extent possible this survey. And we were supposed to develop a model survey that then LEAs would use as part of their structure. So we've been working on developing the model survey, as well as determining if you only collect exit data, you don't really understand the full picture. And so there needed to also be an engagement survey to really have a full understanding of how do the other teachers in the LA feel versus how do the teachers leaving feel. because the people in the LEA could feel exactly the same as the ones leaving, and we wouldn't really have any data to use in a way that gives us any information. So we've created both an engagement and an exit survey that would require, exit would be administered whenever someone leaves. The engagement survey would be every other year, because the other year they'd be taking the school climate survey. So trying to reduce the burden for our teachers on how many surveys they need to take by giving alternate surveys each year. And Sarah can talk about the instance. We want to use Qualtrics as our delivery platform for the surveys to allow us to be able to use that data at the state level. In the educator exit survey, the LEAs would need to use our questions, and they may add to our questions, but they would have to use the model questions as part of their survey so that we have data to use to make informed policy decisions.
So to clarify, they can add questions, but they cannot
They cannot take away. So we tried to keep it small enough that if they wanted to add them, it wasn't a huge burden on teachers, but also give them that flexibility if they might have other questions they're interested in. But from a policy informing perspective, you have to have the same data points to inform policy, and so that is where we're at. I think you were pulling up something. Questions you may have.
Okay, yeah. I'm just confused by the sound.
The beeping.
Yeah, somebody's trying to connect a call, so just ignore it.
Okay, just ignore the beeping, the random beeping.
Or explosion. So questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't say that out loud. I know, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you delete that? I'm sorry. Okay, questions from board members, committee members.
So I understand that we're doing this because it's mandated by statute as far as the exit survey. It's
House Bill
also
130.
potentially some good information, but maybe the guys from Qualtrics can help us. Exit surveys are, at least my understanding is they're highly unreliable usually. People don't have a lot of incentive to provide good information or provide you with all their real reasons for leaving, especially if they want to reference later. It's hard to keep them anonymous because you've got one survey from one person when they're leaving. Is there anything that we've gone into this?
They have been very influential on this.
So, I mean, I'd be happy to, I'm not sure, Matt, would you be willing?
I think that's
Can you go on
more...
up to the table?
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Come on over.
It gets real official. There's 3 chairs.
Yeah. You want to come down here?
No.
Oh, well.
We can add to it, I guess.
So start by introducing your name,
No, there we go.
your entity, and then we'll jump into the
So
answer.
Matt Vista with Qualtrics, and I manage our West Coast business, which is K-12 higher education, state and local government entities.
Mohamed Pacanos, also I'm on Matt's team, support K-12 specifically.
I'm Richard Otley. I'm from Qualtrics. I'm on the engineering team.
Awesome. Yeah, so a lot of the work that we do with normal organizations, whether it's a huge corporation, a university, K-12, et cetera, is normally you look at the life cycle of an employee from beginning to end. So that might be application, you get a job, onboarding, 30, 60, 90 days, pulse surveys where we're regularly checking in. I think of that as like a small survey or an annual engagement. Maybe it's every other year, and then there's an exit survey. So exit surveys, yes, the concern with exit surveys is if you leave, they have to basically make the conscious decision of, am I going to do you the favor of telling you why I'm leaving? And they might be leaving because they're angry, or they don't like you, or maybe they got booted out or pushed out somehow. And so yes, is that data biased? It could be, for sure. Is it still helpful data to have, and should you still track it? Yes, and is the state requiring it? Yes, to the best of our ability. That's why we recommend it as well as not only the exit survey, but let's see if we can't get engagement survey before people exit. And if they exit, we're basically asking them, are you exiting because you're leaving teaching profession, or are you leaving for a different school? And we're asking that same basically block of questions in the engagement as well as the exit, so then that way you can start to do correlations between, great, we know these people exit for sure, it's after the fact.
Welcome.
Now we know that people that are responding the same way haven't left yet, but they feel the same way. That's a concern, and now it falls on the state or to the LEA to say, okay, hey, we recognize an issue. What do we want to do about it? Now, the tricky part of that is by default, the way that we're doing it right now is it's anonymous. And so it's trending, but at least you can recognize trends and say, hey, we want to build a policy we realized that this is a trend that we're seeing before teachers actually do exit. Maybe let's build a policy around facilitating a change here. And then we actually have a mechanism to track it and see if improvement is actually happening. Whereas right now, if you're not on a centralized platform, everybody's doing their own thing, and so even just getting the data to talk to each other and to make sense gets very, very, very complicated, very, very, very fast. And so the first step is, hey, let's get all the LEAs in the same system. Let's get them using the same survey. Great, now we can actually make informed decisions based off of data instead of hunches.
And some level, the quantity that we'll have through this having one platform will help, because we'll have more to rely upon.
So we can kind of normalize the data by, especially the past data. Same questions then, basically, all the way through. Is that okay?
Well, and the engagement survey makes the exit survey.
Otherwise, the exit would have no meaning.
Right.
You wouldn't know how to interpret it, given what is the culture for all teachers, not just the ones leaving.
Yeah.
They convinced me we needed a game. I wouldn't have known.
I think the biggest things with the data, too, is at least the way that we're formatting this, so each LEA has the autonomy to push it out, engagement on their own, or exit surveys on their own. So, right, so it's not one of those things where we're big brother, we're
okay.
Right, we're providing an outline, but at the end of the day, you have the autonomy to push it out how you want. The beauty of it, though, is the way that we're doing it, it rolls up to a centralized dashboard that the state can look at, and all the LEAs can look at, too, and break down, depending on how we want to set this up, by different variables like demographics, or depending on how anonymous, right, that is. Obviously, you're not going to be able to identify people. But even just by districts or perhaps by regions, to where we can say, hey, look, there's a common region in the Northeast. What's going on up there that perhaps isn't going on in the Southwest? And is there a fundamental change that we could make or adopt? Right? So I don't know if that helps or answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions by committee members? One of the things, did I read it wrong or correct? A teacher could identify their school if they wanted to. Is that correct?
That's an optional
It's
component.
but it's not required.
It's not required.
Some people were worried about that and concerned, but it's completely optional.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most engagements you want to be anonymous.
Yes.
If you
want,
want,
I know a lot of
if you want real
honesty.
honest data, the worst thing you can do is say,
fill this out.
hey, give us your name.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because teachers, if they think they're identifying their school, they feel like they're identifying themselves. And so that is
you got to be careful.
Yeah.
Politics of the profession. So.
Okay. In the same one, do we need to talk about the engagement now survey? Or have you
the climate. We can always come back
the climate
potentially
one?
if something occurs in terms of what the board rule is. Basically, the connection is the same platform and then the alternating year.
Okay, so you want to talk about the climate one.
If you don't like something in school climate, you don't have to take it out on exit and engagement.
We won't. Okay. Duly noted.
Okay.
The other piece is the flexibility of an LEA being able to have their own questions
Yes.
added within it.
They cannot take them out, but they can add them.
Yeah, and
I think that's a really important thing to
if it's
know.
possible, just to present kind of the infrastructure really
please.
quickly,
Of course.
because it is associated with a business case that's being considered. So in regards to the vision for the deployment, one of the things we hear often from our stakeholders is that there's a lot of survey fatigue.
Yes.
We also know at the State Board of Education that we are challenged at times to be able to get feedback in a timely fashion because there's not a lot of incentive for a teacher to fill out a request from the state level. We're not their direct employer, and that there's not always that kind of interest and buy-in. And so the solution that we've created with Qualtrics is one of USBE continuing our own instance, which we already have, and that each LEA would have their own instance as well. So the delivery model would be that when USBE creates a survey, we would then export it to each of the LEAs to then upload in their own instance. What that allows them to do is to be able to add their own questions that are specific to what their strategic plan is, what their leadership vision is, as well to be able to use their contact list. So now as a teacher, my email is coming from my LEA. And so again, I'm going to have a little more buy-in associated with completing that effort. The data then is reported back to the LEA, which again is a huge step forward And it's another reason we think that we have kind of low response rates, because getting the data out of this agency to the LEA requires a transfer of information, usually via email, and then they have to upload it. This way it's seamless. So as the individuals are responding, the LEA has that opportunity to see the information in aggregate specific to their community for both their questions as well as our questions. In addition to that, the beauty of the system is truly that then in the same time it is coming back to the LEA, those questions that are required for USBE, that data flows to USBE as well. So it comes straight up through the LEA, transparency into USBE, so that we're both working from the same data set associated with those core questions. Last but not least, then each time a survey is given, both USBE and the LEA gets real-time kind of updated data. So if you do have an LEA who, is looking to offer engagement maybe more often because they're trying to study some of the attrition, concerns, that USBE would also have access to that without requiring any additional steps from the LEA itself. So it really is looking to build coherence within the system of gaining access to this qualitative data, but in a way that informs both local steps as well as state-level policy efforts.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from committee members?
It just made me question. So the LEAs can add their own questions as they like, and then you automatically get this uploaded. Do you get uploaded their additional question information? Okay, so that makes it easier for you.
Okay, so
you don't have to sort through and figure out which questions are yours.
Yes, we're only getting our questions reported back.
Okay, great.
Good. Great. Do we have any input from Sarah Jones? Would you like to come up to the table?
Sure. You can come here.
Yes. Here, I'll turn this around so it's not you.
Thank you. Sarah Jones with UEA. I just wanted to flag some concerns we have about not so much the technical or mechanical pieces of how you might conduct a survey, but just the idea of the engagement survey at all. And I think Sarah hit on it with this survey fatigue.
Yeah.
I have gotten a lot of emails in my inbox as we're heading this back-to-school period where teachers are doing all this online training, right? And, okay, so now we just added more to our school safety training, and I'm doing it not on contract time, I'm doing it on personal time. And there's an expectation that teachers are just kind of doing more and more and more and more. And so when I saw that this expanded beyond code, which was the exit survey, which UEA did support last year, to include engagement, that gave me pause. And for a couple of reasons. Not because we don't need the data, because I definitely think we do need the data. I think there just needs to be some real thought and strategy behind how you get the buy-in. And it's more than the technical pieces. So Superintendent Dixon and I had numerous conversations over the last few years about the TEL survey, for example, it's the Teaching, Empowering, Leading, and Learning survey, trying to really understand what's happening at the building level, at the classroom level, to inform policy choices. And as I talked to my colleagues around the country, the number one thing I heard was that the low turnout rate is going to kill you on trying to make policy decisions to be surveyed. And the response rate that they were recommending for that particular survey for TEL was 70 to 80%. And that you need to create a strategy of buy-in. Do principals who are going to be having a lot of these questions focused on them support this? Are they going to give contract time to do this? Is it your own personal time? Is it before school starts in the fall, or is it during assessment period windows in the spring when everyone's crazy? Are the teachers aware of this and kind of understanding what's happening? So there needs to be this high level of confidence that there's anonymity, that you really have a end size at the building level if somebody does report their building, and at the LEA level, when we have some really small LEAs and charters, that what is your minimum in size on that? Who has access to the data? Does my principal see the data? I don't know if my principal sees the data because nothing's in this yet. So my concerns are not so much about the need for the data. It's the rule being silent or there being any accompanying documents about survey administration rules
that tell me as a teacher, I know that I am anonymous and this is how, I know what the minimum end size is, I know what participation rates we're expecting before we try to draw policy assumptions from this. That I know there's a strategy for buy-in, for informing people, and I think the worst outcome is we get a low response rate and legislators look at that and say, oh, everything's okay. Look, no one responded. They must be happy. Or, there's just a lack of interest. So those things aren't reflected here yet, and they're kind of similar to some questions I had about the climate survey as well. What is the scope, the area of content that really is going to be included here? Why were these particular areas picked but nothing else? That wasn't necessarily in the rule. And like I said, I'm not sure what needs to be in rule versus in supporting documents about how you administer it. But I would just give you caution about, what is the time frame for this survey to take? I didn't see anything about, it was 19 printed pages, but is that estimated to take me 5 minutes? Is that estimated to take me 30 minutes? Can I start the survey and then stop and come back? Does it close out? Am I expected to do it at a faculty meeting and the principal's right there? We're all answering questions about the principal. So it's those kinds of questions that could sink what could be really good data if you don't approach it well.
So, Sarah, I just think, did you just volunteer to be a part of the stakeholder group?
I think she did.
And implementation plan, because your questions were
so great.
spot on with exactly what needs to happen with the communication and implementation plan. And so that is something that I think we're very articulate and well spoken with. All of those things need to be addressed. So probably be expecting an email.
I suppose so. Yeah, and I guess that actually raises another question for me: is this launching this year? Because I would think you would need months of communication before you launch.
I would like to. The legislation requires us to bring data next fall
for the exit.
Yes, so we do have to launch soon. And the exit data really won't have any meaning if we don't have engagement data in terms of what does it mean for teachers because people in place that aren't leaving may feel similarly to exit, or they may be vastly different, and we won't know that without both data points. So I think those are great questions around implementation. I don't think we've gotten to that point. We needed to get the rule developed because we have to bring it to interim for the interim committee to weigh in on, and they're going to have very similar questions, I am sure. And then we're bringing it back to the board after the interim committee weighs in for further modifications. So today's not even to approve the rule per se. It's really just to say, are you good enough with what we have to go to interim?
Right.
If not, we've got to buckle down and hopefully get in there before November. Knowing that we still have the opportunity to modify that rule even after.
And you bring it back with some of the answers to these questions?
Well, it's seeing what parts need to go in the rule versus what parts go in a guidance or implementation tool. We could still both bring.
So I think we are expecting a motion to pass it on first reading here.
If we make no changes.
Unless you want it to come back to committee after interim.
Do we have time for it to come back to committee?
But that would take up some time.
Sorry, lots of people want to.
Yeah, there's an implementation component to this as well, and one of them is that so we are looking to pilot this. We're looking to pilot this with 10 LEAs in the later fall to be able to work through some of the kind of implementation questions and concerns. In our ideal world, we'd like to have a frequently asked questions document, and part of getting to that is doing some initial work with a smaller group of LEAs before we would look to take it to a statewide scale. So from the implementation side, there's actually lots of opportunity in regards to kind of the guidance document and what do those components look like in the crafting of those as part of both our pilot experience, but then also refining on that from the pilot experience to be able to get information before we go to more of a statewide component and level. I do know that some of our interests in being able to advance the rule is specific to being able to run that pilot, to be able to at least have that kind of initial data about the direction that we're going in regards to that larger effort to share with our legislators in the upcoming legislative session. Not, to be clear, the full state, but just at least having the opportunity to start that initial pilot experience.
I think Board Member Hanson, either you had a question or comment?
Well, I think after hearing the comments, the rules should definitely address who has access to the data.
Yeah.
That part of it. I think that's got to be in rule. The other stuff probably is implementation. With regards to participation rates, I think the best way to get those is to offer some kind of reward personally. $25 Amazon card or movie tickets or something like that. Those are the only surveys that get filled out in my experience. And I don't know what kind of reward that could be.
I always fill those out.
But yeah,
I'll give you
that would be my
Marsh, and
two
then
pieces of.
Patty, and I just want to say, give us, I know it's not our job, but give us another contract day, give us another work day, like, we can do a lot of surveys if you whoever that is. Board Member Marsh.
My question was, is this a mandatory thing, or is this an opt-out that they can opt out of it if they, nope, I don't want to give you that,
So
I'm out the
from
door.
the exit perspective, they don't have to take it. The LEAs are supposed to make every attempt to get them to take it, but there is no requirement. So if they have 80 teachers leave and they only get surveys from 40, there's no punishment to the LEA for not getting
Yeah,
it.
the rule says shall request. Shall request.
Shall request, okay, that's what the rule was, okay.
Patty, and then Lonnie.
As with most things, leadership matters.
Yes.
And within the schools, it's usually not about the incentive of money, it's about the incentive of time.
Yes.
And so if an administrator can set aside the time, perhaps during a faculty meeting or something else where everyone's advised to bring their device to, we're going to log on, here's a purpose, let's get it done. And that getting it done is probably more valuable than anything else because they don't have to think about it, it's off their plate and moving forward with it. So I think that's what most administrators would possibly do if this is mandatory. Then we're going to give you the time to be able to do it during a meeting or something like that.
You had a comment?
I do.
Come on up and introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Gina James with the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. And obviously, for charter schools, we have a lot of the same concerns that the UEA also has, just in the implementation and mainly, the survey fatigue. And I was wondering if there was a way that perhaps the engagement survey could be combined with the climate survey. Looking over those surveys, there was some overlap, and I know that surveys can be set, and this is more of an implementation thing, set, hey, you're a teacher, you're a parent, you're a student, okay, so you answer these set of questions. And I wonder if that might kind of help cut down on some, all the surveys that everyone is asked to speak. And to the point, your point in the charter schools with the smaller, sometimes the smaller time frame, or, with fewer resources, sometimes it's, a little stretched, that maybe, I don't know how that would go to give some of those suggestions to the LEAs on how to implement this, since it is state.
Yeah.
That would certainly be appreciated with it, but I appreciate the discussion and just reiterate some of the other things that Sarah said in regards to, the data is good, but just getting people to be able to answer that, so.
From an implementation standpoint, just because I couldn't agree more, it's actually one of the reasons we're super excited to be partnering with Qualtrics in this space, because it's possible for anyone to create a Google form, and be able to go and, start asking questions, and it gets really overwhelming. Some of the amazing features and functions that are available include things in regards to being able to say how many surveys can an individual be asked to take, and that's actually controlled at an LEA level in regards to being able to identify, okay, have we already asked this person like 20 different times for their feedback on their back to school night experience, and they're a parent kind of like within that space.
Sure.
And so there's actually a lot of functionality that's possible within the platform. And it's one of the reasons that we weren't just choosing any survey tool, but we really wanted something that does support those kind of best practices with not overwhelming our stakeholders.
Sure, thank you. And just one question, if I may. When I looked at the rule, I didn't notice a huge fiscal note. I mean, as far as cost on this, is any of that being transferred back to the LEAs? I mean, if you're providing this tool that they can link into and add on, how does that work?
Yeah, so we have, it's a great question. So there's two components to that. So the first one is in regards to being able to operationalize it this year. There's consideration in regards to potentially using agency carryover funds to be able to provide the statewide licensure component, while we're making a business case request that our board is currently considering in regards to being able to have a legislative note to be able to provide it kind of similar to a Canvas, statewide license where all of our LEAs would then have access underneath that. No additional cost passed down to an LEA.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Are there any other questions, or are we ready for a motion? And do we need to have, we've got a couple of motions here because we've got the climate survey, we've got the exit entrance. Well,
So
go ahead.
I know that we've had a chance to present the exit survey.
Yeah.
I would not want to cut into the climate survey because I know they have additional items to present.
I just didn't know if we can do a motion on this, or do we need to hear them first? Okay, so we're ready for a motion for this one.
This one's on the exit.
Only on the exit survey?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I would move that we adopt, well, we want to, wait a second, I'm not going to do the motion yet, timing-wise. So this needs to be, because I think we need to, we talked about adding some pieces here maybe on
We talked about
data.
adding one piece, and I'm
Right.
wondering if we could add that and have them approve.
If there's language you want to add, we can do that, but I think the motion would be to adopt this on first reading and refer it to the Education Interim Committee and then to the full board.
Without the amendment.
Well, the addition would
Well,
the addition
we
would be,
can add the amendment if there's
the addition would be the
specific language you want
data.
to add in.
Yeah, I think the main one that came out was that who has access
Just,
to the
yeah,
data.
access to data.
Yeah.
So move that we adopt the rule as presented in draft 1 with the addition of language that clarifies who will have access to data.
What's specific?
And
So that I can draft that and add that to the rule. What specific limitations do you want to?
yeah,
put
well,
there?
and that's, we probably have to back off and talk about it. I think that the principal in a school or the administrator in that school, if you've got individual surveys going out, they shouldn't have access to that data until it comes up here and gets spit back in an aggregate.
Superintendent, do you want to come up, or?
Well, maybe an idea is to make more generic language about the data, because I know it's
Yes.
something that the interim committee would also want to weigh in
Yes.
on. So it's almost like instead of with a proposed amendment, with a proposed action to add in information on data that will also be presented to Education Interim and then come back to this committee for second.
That's probably a better way to handle
And
it.
I guess
than
the
to try and do it
question
right
would
now.
be, are you okay if we pilot even though the rule is not completely approved? Because I think that was your.
That's kind of what Sarah was
due date.
saying.
That was my impression of what
I
you
thought.
said.
What's the schedule look like then? You want to pilot this next week?
No.
No, so in order,
That's the rule, but.
yeah, so the rule would need to go forward at full board in October, as well as
It
a
can't go in
consideration.
October, because it's going in September, it can't, okay.
Yeah, it would.
I think you could voluntarily, if you have a voluntary pilot program, you could do that without the rule being enforced.
That's what I was
To require other LEAs to participate, and we could still continue the rulemaking process if you have LEAs volunteering to participate.
If you guys would be comfortable with that.
Committee, are you, superintendent?
Yeah, but in terms of the timing, I think this goes back to Board Member Hanson's
Yes.
question. So in terms of the timing, you still have this sequence of getting the information, including language on data, to interim.
Yes.
That then, that's like simultaneously, you could say, here's where we'll be piloting when you come back in October to this committee. Then you have another layer to that. It doesn't prevent you from getting that started. But then this committee would feel more comfortable, I would assume, by having all the language in place in the rules, in addition to the conversation that's been had on the Hill. Right? So you would come back on second reading here in October, but it wouldn't preclude you from starting the pilot. They could just add that information to the committee report in case you all said, wait, stop, we're uncomfortable with this part of the pilot, or how about adding this part to the pilot?
So we don't need to move the rule yet. We can
You
do
just
that
need
next.
to let us be able to
Yes.
take it to interim at
So-
this point would be the action, and then
Yeah.
we'll bring it back to you and do a summary of what happened at interim.
I think we might feel
and
more
any
comfortable with
additions
that. That's a sense
And
of
when is it
committee.
interim?
We asked for this to be put on, knowing we were with all of you.
Yes.
September 19th, I believe, it's the
It's
Wednesday.
contingent upon you
Yeah.
Of
approving
you
it.
saying yes.
So,
Please know that.
Board Member Hanson, I don't know if you wanted to continue your motion or if you want to like.
I'm about ready to abandon ship on the motion.
That's not the right response.
I think that we can
You could direct staff.
direct staff to address the issue of data access in the rule and
In preparation.
authorize, in preparation for interim, and authorize staff to take this to interim with those, with that language in it, and to bring it back with suggested language as draft 2 to this committee next month.
Oh, well done.
Really good. Now, Nora Lee. Hey, guess what? You're going to have to say that again.
I feel like I should just start recording.
Yeah, I know.
It is recorded.
Okay, so we can go back on the recording.
That was a long one.
So with that motion that was great, where you're going to direct staff to look at data access, et cetera, in preparation for the interim committee and then bring it back, but in a more beautifully said way. Do we have any discussion of that motion for that direction? I guess we'll vote anyway. Okay. Yeah.
Could I just clarify the comment that I made about the data? So
Yeah.
as you are drafting or thinking of language, to me, the issue is who has access to individual data, who has access to aggregate data, who has access to building level data, who has access to LEA level data, and then at the state level also, who has, if this suddenly becomes public level data, or how is that? So it's all of those pieces. And I do think that in order to get people to participate in a pilot, I would want to know that before I do
Yeah.
a survey. Right? If they're asking me questions about my principal, I'm going to want to know, does my principal have access to that data?
And I think just a lot of the questions you asked, determining which ones make sense in rule and which ones make sense in some kind of guidance. But we need to protect the survey takers to them,
That's
at
gotta
least
be
to
in
their
the rule.
knowledge of what's
That's
going
gotta
to
be
be happening. So we can definitely add that.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Okay.
working with us on it.
Thank you so much. These are great questions. So you guys are good. Ben, you're good. Okay, so any more discussion from the committee? Then all those in favor of that beautiful motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much. You guys, great discussion.
Can I, while this is on my mind,
Of
Jen,
course you can.
This is not a motion on this.
Okay.
But as we bring these to the group, it seems like we have this discussion many times because
Yeah.
you're aware of some schedule constraints.
Yes.
We don't necessarily see, and I was looking back at the memo that comes with it. If there was a timeline there that said,
Great.
this is our suggested timeline, not just on this rule, but on every rule that comes in, then we can kind of see.
When time is sensitive, let
Well,
me
we've
know.
got it, well, even if it's not sensitive, if we've got 3 months and we should say, 3 months, this is when we expect it to come out of committee. This is our hard deadline at the end, when we've got to be out testing it or whatever.
We'll add that to
That would be
the
very helpful
Yeah,
if that
good.
was
Oh,
in
We'll just add it to the memo.
in the memo.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
wonderful.
thank you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Our urgency is not always right.
Well, we don't know. We don't know a lot of times. Unless we engage like we should with them. we don't know.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we have Christy and Rhett come on up to the table? You'll go around. Good, you wrote it. Okay, Christy and Rhett,
Hi.
go ahead and now, it's your turn. Please talk to us.
All right, Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator.
Brett Larson, School and Student Safety Specialist.
So we'd like to talk just for a minute about the school safety or the school climate survey that kind of came out of House Bill 120 as a requirement for all schools to either procure one or utilize the one that USDA provides. And just for a general framework of what's happening currently in the schools, when we did the school safety survey, we had about 80% of our participants, which were building level administrators, say that they are currently using a school climate survey. And so to that extent, we don't see this as an additional burden, but rather something to help gauge what the perception of safety is within the schools, not just by students, but staff, parents, community members, and school resource officers. And at this point, of that, about 80%, about 32% of them are currently procuring them. And so this, for us to create one here at the state level and then provide it free to the LEAs would be a real service. So the survey that you can see attached to the agenda there, we can talk through kind of the origins of where this came from and kind of what brought us to the outcome that you're looking at. This is something that has been in the works for a number of years. So the original school climate survey was one that we received permission to use from Davis School District. Theirs was an in-house created one as well with their research and assessment department, utilizing multiple surveys, gathering multiple questions from different surveys, of which I was a part of that process. So it was used and found to be a pretty valid source of data. And then when we received permission here at USB to utilize that same survey, we again took that one, took it through multiple committees, including our School Safety Center, which is the Department of Public Safety and the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, along with multiple prevention specialists, our School Safety Advisory Committee, and multiple other stakeholders. And so I do have the little stack here of resources, kind of like the phone book of school safety and school climate surveys. And I must tell you that anonymity of this survey is written into the legislation. And so the identifiers that you can see at the very beginning are things like gender, which we even give the option for no response. Ethnicity, because we do want to gauge equitable practices and perception of equitable practices by all geographic and ethnic minorities. And so we want to be sure that those things are protected, and thereby those are the only indicators. Now it is grouped according to like K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 to 12, SRO, parent, administrator, and school staff. But as far as breaking things down, one issue that we have discussed, and I'll just be very frank with you, is within some regions, there may only be one African American student. So thereby, that takes away their anonymity. And so that is something that we need to be aware of as we look at this data and keeping that anonymity in high value. And so I do just want to put that on the table. But the questions within this were looked at through the scope of the National School Climate Center, the United States Department of Education climate survey, which they developed and have offered free online. There were extensive conversations around just using the one that the United States Department of Education provides. But what we found after really digging into those questions is many of those questions were similar to the SHARP survey, specific to risk, and some of those questions were very specific to academic performance and classroom management, which we felt was a duplication of other surveys. So we really wanted to focus on social and emotional health, well-being, perception of physical safety, and a perception of connectedness and equitable services within schools. So, Brett, do you want to add anything?
I guess the LEAs can add questions again like the other.
Yes. Absolutely. And just to add to that question, if I may, one thing too that we considered in drafting these questions is the length of this survey.
Right.
Because some of the school climate surveys that are out there, they're fantastic and they're really in depth, but they're also 200 questions. And so the maximum questions are about 54 when it's all said and done on here. And so keeping, the bulk of what we really feel is the absolute most important, combining some questions, trying to stick to the validity of what's been developed in previous surveys. So it was kind of a lengthy effort, but we do feel very good about the outcome. So at this point, I'm really excited about this. If you can't tell, yeah. So one thing that I really love about the school climate survey, and I'm really happy that it is something that we can move forward with, is when it comes to looking at the overall safety of a school and the climate and the risk and protective factors and all those things that we want to see within a happy school setting. It's one thing to look at discipline data and geographic data, and demographic data and all of these other things, but it's another thing to really get a feel for how people see that school. Do they know who they would go talk to? Who's their trusted adult? Do they feel like they have friends? And so there was even discussion around, what about these K through 2 non-readers? You're going to have a teacher reading their survey to them. But things like, I have friends at school. If you have a kid that says no, or you have a whole group of kids that it's my time up. Done. And she's
someone else decided that.
That's my reminder to breathe.
And then, but wait, there's more.
We're chucking chats. Okay. Just to be able to gauge the connectedness, because one thing that we do measure a lot is all of these incidents and negative behaviors and not so much the protective factors. So we were very aware of that in questions. Do these kids have opportunities to connect to school? Do they have opportunities to be leaders? Do they feel like they're connected to a teacher? And so we really wanted to drill down to those things. And where it's required by every school, you're really getting a better sample than you would on something like the SHARP survey. And so this is something that is really going to help drive programs and interventions and universal interventions and practices for all students. So, can I get an amen?
Perhaps the chair could call for a motion. I think what you meant to say is, first of all, do we have any questions? Is that a hand?
I have a question.
Board member Hanson.
So I see in the rule that we have this one being administered once every other year,
Yes.
and the opposite year from the education exit and engagement survey. I guess that's the engagement survey. The exit survey is going to take place whenever someone exits. That's not in the law. That's part of our rule. Is that right? We had a suggestion to combine it, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. It looks like we have, first, do we have flexibility to do that if we wanted to?
To combine the two? Yes, I really feel like it's the best way to implement, because I think it's already been spoken to that when you catch a teacher when they're walking out the door, sometimes it's not under happy circumstances. So again, it's just gathering that negative data, like what did everybody do wrong? Where's all your red check marks,
So I'm speaking about combining the engagement survey and the climate survey.
Oh, yeah, and I don't see an issue with that.
Sarah, do you?
Yeah, so I mean, we're just talking then about a much longer survey.
Yeah, that's my
and I think that was our attempt at trying to reduce that fatigue was then by splitting them, so there was one year, one a different year.
So what about just the idea of inertia? Getting somebody started on taking a survey is the difficult part, and once they get going, they'll
As a
finish
teacher,
it.
I'd rather have shorter surveys.
I don't know.
I don't know, that's me every year than a huge long one every year.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Patty,
think
you were going to say something.
We've
That's
got
good. Okay.
Jen behind you, I think, Jen from Qualtrics was.
Are you just messing with me? No. Oh, wait. Jen has something to say.
I'd say shorter is better.
He says shorter.
Shorter better? Okay.
Well then, if there are no, board member Ken.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I didn't know whether or not I should bring up. I'm looking at the survey questions.
Yeah.
And I personally am offended when somebody asks my race, because I think race ends up not being really a true indication of a person. For example, I have a sister-in-law who's 1/8 Cherokee. What race should she be? On the other hand, I think everyone has an ethnicity. And I was listening to you, and you were talking about ethnicities. So I think race is something that a group of people develop to put down other people. And I think ethnicity is more valid. You can do with that what you want. That's just my input.
And I'm fine with either way. Part of the reasoning behind that wording is that is how the United States Department of Ed words it.
I thought it might be something like that. Yeah.
Brett, did you have a comment?
So to also look at that, and we actually, board member Cannon, we had that conversation in depth.
Oh, really?
On all of
I'm not the only
yeah,
one?
Yeah, so on all the tabs, the school staff, the administrators, the parent SRO, that was one thing that we had talked about specifically with that question. And I understand and I appreciate that. And some of the conversations that we've also had, and of course it is up to you to make that determination what you would like, but some of the questions we've had is it can also drive individual support where needed. And so I come from a rural area in Utah where I have family who are American Indian, and sometimes they might see that their resources are limited where the school might see it's not. And so being able to see the school climate survey and be able to say, okay, maybe we need to provide additional resources, or so that's some of the conversation that took place around that question. But so I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, some of the data you would get in terms of like leadership experience, or do I have a friend? I mean, there's a lot of.
That's just my.
No, it's a great point.
Anyway, and then on number 25, I was looking. My teaching is hindered by poor heating, cooling, and/or lighting systems at this school.
Which tab are you on?
This is number 25. Question.
On what tab?
Question. This is the one you sent us.
Right, there's a school staff, administrator, parent, or SRO. What tab?
Well, I don't know. I'm just starting at the top of the survey questions. Oh, school staff.
School staff.
Thank you.
Down towards the bottom.
Okay.
25. My teaching is hindered. I'm just wondering about adding acoustics to that. Because I think there are times when, and I know there are some schools that have all of their teachers use devices that amplify their voice so kids are hearing. So I'm just wondering about acoustics to that.
Yeah, we can see if there's a vetted question around that one. And one of the conversations we had around when you talk about structural components and construction and upgrades, if we get that information, what are we going to do with it? And so we do have to be aware that once we dig into, because there's questions around, cleanliness, and is there broken stuff in my school? And then you're looking at, how do the kids view the materials they're provided within their educational setting? And so that's one thing. That's one thing just to consider. But I know there's a lot of data around being able to hear your teacher and what kind of room it is, and not only that, but students, if they sit in the back of the class or if they have access to hear the information.
Okay.
Those were my two questions.
Good. If there are no other questions or comments, just never with Sarah.
May I make
A few public comments? You have good comments. I only allow good comments. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. I'm just kidding.
Sarah Jones with UEA. So just to again flag on this one, the data access to data issue. I didn't know if that was automatically going to be carried over from the other rule, but who has access to the student data, who has access to the staff data, who has access to aggregate and individual data, and all those kinds of questions. The second question is about participation. On the previous rule, it said the LEA requests. This doesn't say if participation is required or if it's just simply requested. So is participation intended to be required for each one of these constituencies?
Do you have an answer to that?
I do, and part of that is some of it is not clearly written within House Bill 120.
Okay.
And so when we were looking at the requirements within board rule, which we were directed to do so, we only have so much control over who takes what and how. And so looking at, yes, we want to offer a school resource officer survey, but if they don't, then what?
Yeah.
Same with parents. So if you require a certain number of parents to participate, in some schools, you might as well say, let's shoot for the moon.
Yeah.
You know, it can be a very difficult balance. And so ultimately, they are required to have a certain sample size as written within the board rule. But as far as requiring, say this right, requiring certain individuals to take that. So as far as, you as a student have to take this survey, that's going to be identified as far as like sample. So looking cross grades, cross ability levels, cross, the curricula, so you're getting a clear slice of what that whole demographic within that building looks like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I just wonder if maybe it needs to mirror the language from the rule you just adopted, which was an LEA shall request completion. I don't know if that makes sense, try to get sample size, but it wasn't clear to me if, again, I'm coming kind of from the educator perspective, but is it required for every educator to complete the survey, or is it simply required for the LEA to offer the chance for them to participate in the survey? And so I think that needs to be clarified, required or requested. And then the other final question I had was kind of about the scope of the survey. The section of the code where this is required says that the rules will specify the areas of content for the school climate survey. And when Christy went through, you described what those areas are, perceptions of safety, those kind of things, but there's nothing outlining the scope, the breadth, the content of the survey topics that the board has deemed appropriate before you've written the questions. And the way that I look at code, that's intended to be included in the rule.
And so I'm not the legal expert, but I know when we spoke to Jeff surrounding that concern, how do we whittle down and say we have to have at least like this, because your list would be almost as long as the survey itself. And so the recommendation was to attach the survey as a document as part of the board rules, so the survey itself is adopted. So the content therefore is listed through attaching the document, because the survey in and of itself, when we say yes, we adopt this board rule, you're adopting the survey as well.
So if anyone in the public had a concern with an item on the survey, they would need to say that before the rule is adopted, because the survey is adopted once the rule is adopted.
Yes,
is that correct?
Thank you, Sarah. And just as Sarah was talking, I was thinking about, can students opt out of this? I wrote that down and then I saw you wrote it down. I just was wondering if that's something that's...
It's anonymous, and
but I mean, but still you have some who will like to opt out anonymously, like the Sharp survey, for example.
Yeah.
The rule says shall provide the way it is now.
So shall provide, and so.
And I believe there's language within House Bill 120 that says this does not require any certain one party to
right, it's just
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you guys are so informative.
Yeah.
Any other? I learned so much.
You're so sweet.
No. If there's no other questions, what we're looking for is an action to approve R277623 if somebody would like to make a motion.
You make it.
Okay. You know what? Then I move that we approve R277623. I'm going to add that we take into consideration some of the discussion that we've had here and incorporate that as we move forward. Draft one on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Would that include the data access?
Yes, I'm hoping that is the kind of the discussion goes to that. Yes, Sarah.
Can I just clarify, because we just had a quick side conversation here, that the code does say nothing can be required for an individual to respond to the survey.
Yeah.
So is that one of the pieces that would be added before it goes to second reading, that it's optional? Or clarified?
Yeah, well, and that would fit with code, right?
We would just
Yes.
refer back to the code.
Yeah, we would refer back to the code, so. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes with all the other stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, you guys. Okay, let's find out where we are. We've done 5 and 6. We're gonna need Jeff. Yeah. Start, and we've done 2. We can start on 3.
Oh, yeah, 3. I'll start on 3.
Okay. Let me get back to. We're getting, yeah. Oh, yeah, we could do 4, but okay, we'll start on 3. You know it is.
Not a fan.
I know.
This is nasty. Every time you click something, it throws you clear back. Nothing's
I know, there's
formatted.
all these curves that you don't expect.
Yeah.
I've got hard copy. Got a reminder.
Do those. Which one?
Okay, so we're gonna go with action,
Which one are we
we're
going
gonna go
to?
with item number
Number
3, which is R277108, the annual assurance of compliance by local school boards. I think, Sarah, are you up for this one? Or no, you're
I
leaving.
can do it.
Oh, Patty.
No, Jeff's not here.
I thought you were gonna be Jeff for us.
No.
I clever. You're like, did you like that?
Yeah. She was like, maybe.
Yeah. Why don't we have Patty start us off on that, talking to us about what this is, what we need to know, and then hopefully Jeff will be in here.
So R277108, the annual assurance of compliance by local school boards, is just updated for technical and conforming changes. There's nothing substantive in nature within it. It's just about the assurances that a school has to follow the list of laws the school board having to require.
Okay, any other questions? Any questions?
Yeah, so have we checked to make sure that, I know all the
Yeah.
times we're saying, put this on the assurance checklist and,
Yeah.
you know, is it updated to include everything that we've added to the assurances?
Are
Jeff?
you on there, Jeff?
Assurances? I heard
Does the checklist
assurances.
include
That's where we
everything
are. We haven't
Do
done
the
2 yet.
assurances include everything?
that we're supposed to?
Yeah, 'cause
Yes.
I know
And we
every now and
double-checked.
again we'll say, let's put this on the assurances list.
So, and also what happens every year is the finance team sends out an email to the entire staff saying, here is the current assurances list. Is there anything else we need to be adding? Is there something we need to take away? So we always update it before it gets sent out in July.
Okay.
Oh, good.
I like the format of it.
Yeah.
That looks nice. I like what that is.
Then the other question I had is, what do we do with this information? Is anybody tracking this? What happens if we're not assured that people are in compliance?
They are tracking.
Who tracks it?
So it is, the repository is the finance team, and then the staff that is responsible for each component, so every individual assurance, it is up to that staff to seek out from the finance team the data relevant to their checklist, and then they are supposed to go through and sort and find the yeses and the nos, and follow up individually under their own job duties regarding any particular assurance that may need to be addressed if somebody said, no, we don't do this.
Board Member Hanson, I think you
Yeah, I
had a
have a
question.
couple. So first, this says LEA name at the top, so I assume it's being done at a school level. Is that right? But then it says below that each school board or charter school governing board should provide. So this is coming from the schools to the school board to us? Is that
correct?
Okay, so, and then the purpose of this, I understand we have to do it to comply with state law. We have to have this list of assurances, and we're trying to make sure that all these things that are required are getting done. How far do we want to take that, I guess? So I'm looking at the first 2, school emergency response plan. And it says by July 1st of each year that the emergency preparedness plan's been practiced, and it has a link to the policy and procedure. And it has a hard date in there, July 1st. And so when they check yes, we will assume that at that school, by July 1st, they did this, and here's their policy. Then we go to the next one, emergency drills, and it just says required drills have been held, students have proper supervision, and then it says yes or no. If we wanted to, we could say put in the last date of each drill. So we want to. Do we want to? I'm not saying change it. I'm just saying, what's the purpose of this? If I'm the guy checking the boxes on here, I'm an administrator at an elementary school, and I'm going, did we do our fire drills and stuff? Yeah, I think we did. Check. Or I could say, there's my calendar. When was the last date we did this? Boom, 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 and check it off. I think if we want a real assurance, we would do something on level 2, but that's going to put more of a burden on them. But it's also going to save us a lot of headache in the long run if he's just checking the box because once he's hurrying through and thinking, yeah, best of my recollection. Anyway,
That's
it's
exactly
a big question. It's not. Yeah.
That's the exact conversation that's been had over the last year with the assurance document. Was what, and we're calling it evidence. So, what evidence do we have of any of these things? First of all, the assurance document is for us to be able to see where there's risk and to be able to mitigate risk, first of all, when there's no, so they don't have it. So then we can send support out to help them saying, why not? What can we do to help you? And then we have auditing that goes on as well to be able to say, is there other levels of risk saying that you did have it, but we have a team coming out and we're not sure that it's happening. When we have the evidence over there, that's also enabling staff to have model policies. So if someone comes in and says, well, we're not sure what that looks like, we can say, well, we have a link to everyone's and here's what you can look for.
Yeah.
So your comment about do we need to have evidence on all of them, that's something that's been discussed along the way. We had Terry Shoemaker in here, and I think we had the school boards that were in here so they could speak to it. We have Pierre Kanya, and speaking about the level of work that would take, and which would be great for maybe a large school district to be able to have the personnel to do that. But then when we have our smaller school districts, then it requires more time. Even though they're doing it, time and effort. So I don't know if we want the school boards to speak to it.
I'd like that. But my question is really, so I understand it's more work. Everything we put in there turns into more work, but it also reduces the risk. I mean, assurance that there's an assurance that says, yeah, I think we did it. And then there's assurance that said, we did it on this day.
Yep.
And those are two different things in my mind. So that's what we're balancing, I guess. But yeah, if you can,
Bridget, do you want to
please help us.
Sure. My name's Bridget Gerard from Davis School District, and I agree that this is a lot of work to be able to comply with these lists of things. And I'll speak for a minute for Davis School District. We are a large district. We have a lot of very qualified staff that works on this kind of thing. But I will also speak for the smaller districts. Linda isn't here today, and she's from a smaller district. And her concern was that they don't have the personnel to. When they don't have the personnel to spread around, and some of them have many different jobs, and so when one is working on this long list of things, they're taken away from the other job that they could be doing. So she had a real concern with this, and one of the JLC's recommendations to our legislators this year is to please be aware of the amount of legislation that they're putting out for education bills. And this kind of fits a little bit, it's great and needed, but it does add up all of the compliance and rules and the language, exact language and this kind of thing. But I think the smaller school districts have a much harder time with this because of the lack of personnel to do these kinds of things.
Chair, if I may, I think one thing that has compounded that issue as well is this goes out in July.
Yes.
So the vast majority of the staff that can answer these questions are not present.
Right.
And that's been a concern that's also been raised by the Superintendent's Association is sometimes it's very difficult to even find a person who could say yes or no, let alone what is the evidence. So that's something to consider. I don't really have a solution for that, but that does bring in some complexity and there is a level of risk, and I would also add there's a level of risk here as well because these are all elements of things we're looking for in an assurance document, which typically signals there's not a lot of staff here at the state level for this particular thing that's really able to truly check. And we have programs that get a lot of administrative cost budgets allowed to them so they can actually go in and audit and be physically present, see if, for example, the drills are happening, which we don't get money to do that. But then there's all these other things where we actually don't have the staff or the manpower here at the state office to truly actually go in outside of a list and find out whether or not it's happening. So there is a level of risk we all have to kind of understand exists and decide where is the line between comfortable and uncomfortable.
It's almost like a checklist, like a reminder list for districts. But Patty, you had something to add?
And Board Member Hanson, to your point, if it's been done, you're checking, yes, they should have evidence.
Yes.
And so, and step 2 to that is once you fill it out once, it's like another document, and then the next year, so if those links remain the same, if you're uploading a link to a document, a policy, then if nothing's changed, you can just upload the same link. So there could be a review on this as to which you guys are bringing it back as, but this is something that's different than the rule. So this was actually something about the assurance document itself, about which should have evidence and which should not. If we're looking at some of the other questions, such as Pledge of Allegiance, the Pledge of Allegiance is recited each day in each public school room. So we wouldn't, that's something that the board could decide wouldn't need a line of evidence. Or like in our child nutrition programs, they have to have a picture of something as a line of evidence, whether or not they have healthy things in a vending machine. So as a board, that could be another conversation about the assurance list itself, and then, but that would be outside of the rule that we're doing today.
Well, and Jeff, you said
This is
something.
adopted by the rule though, right?
The assurance document.
The assurance document
It
is
is?
referenced in the
Okay.
rule, so we're adopting
Thank
both
you.
of them. And I look at these and I was thinking about it from an administrator's point of view. Okay, student enrollment options. Student enrollment options are provided as specified in code and rules, what it says, and it's got a list of 5 or 6 different sections of code and rule. If we don't spell that out for them, I think the tendency and the risk would be that they just say, yeah, we're doing that. We've always done it okay, and click. And then we have an assurance document that says to us, no problem, and hasn't prompted any investigation on the other side, and I don't know what good that does us. And so I would be inclined to for us to go through and try to make this easy, but also really be an assurance document. I mean, if this was private sector, you'd be providing a sample of something or like that. I know we're not private sector, we're public sector, but I think this should mean something on every line as far as the assurance. Make them think, make them, say this is when we did it.
There is not a sense of urgency on this. It is out of compliance, but there's not a sense of urgency on it that it has to be passed this time. So if you'd like to make that suggestion to come back and review this to decide, or in today's meeting decide what is and what isn't, then.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing. I think that we could avoid some of the problems that we've run into in the past with a better assurance document. This could be an awesome tool. And if we can get the LAs to understand how much of a problem, potential future problem we could avoid by doing this, and the burden might be not seen as such a burden.
Right.
Things like school fees, if that would have been on a list like this, way back when, and it had some things there that said, then, and they were going through and looking at it, we wouldn't have what we're dealing with now. So I guess my motion would be to direct staff to go back and look at the items on the assurance list and try to come up with suggestions for reasonable assurances, evidence of assurance for each item.
Can I get your feedback on that, Jeff?
Sure. I actually welcome that motion.
Okay.
I would say I would want it to be separate from passing the rule. The rule is updating the list that
Yes.
actually went out in July.
Mm.
So the rule just behind it being compliant, but that could be direction that we could take for this upcoming year, because the assurances are forward-looking. So this is actually just trying to get the rule compliant with what we already did.
Okay.
But I would love to actually say before we change, because this rule has to come back every year
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
update it. So I think before next summer, before we send this out, I think we should take a deep dive. I welcome that.
Great.
Motion about directing staff.
Yeah, so I think the motion on the table is to direct staff to take this back and add evidences for assurances and bring it back.
But that would be for the
To approve the
2021,
rule.
for the 2021
Yes.
school year. And
For the 2021 school
And
year.
in conjunction with that motion, to approve the rule as existent for this year.
And to approve the rule as exists.
So, Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
You sure can.
Okay, so what type of assurances are we gonna ask for? We're gonna ask for them to put a date and time and a signature to the side that they did it? as
That's what we're asking staff
That's
to
what I'm
look
saying,
at.
that's what I'm saying, that's
Yeah.
the kind of things you're
So
looking for.
my idea would
Okay.
be, so if it's fire drills and we say, yeah, we're doing this and the last fire drill was held on this date.
Good, that's what I was
So,
hoping.
Right.
just
I
to
know, like, our
make
school
somebody
already
look at
does
a
it.
calendar.
It's just a matter of-
If we're asking about school days, they can attach the calendar and say, here's our calendar for this year.
Mhm.
It's
That's-
190 school days.
And,
Okay.
and as staff, we can work with the state superintendent, the
Yes,
school
I
board,
wanna make
to
sure
be able to
they-
say what they're doing and how they could give that sort.
We don't want to create a huge pile of
Right,
work,
so we can-
but we
yeah,
do want
we can
this
work
to
with
mean
them.
something here, so that when we go through and say
Yes.
to the legislature, yeah, we've got assurance that, we're 95% compliant here, we really are
So we can
compliant.
work with the schools.
Yeah,
with
yeah,
LEAs.
that's great.
Oh, okay.
I had a question about school fees, just to make it fun.
Shall we pass? Shall we finish this motion and then? Okay. I'm like, oh,
You brought that up.
okay, any other questions or discussions of the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna go to item number 4, I think. And is that okay, Ashley?
You're good.
Okay.
I'm texting away saying just do meeting tomorrow. You're good.
I'm so sorry, okay.
You're fine.
I realized.
If I run upstairs,
Okay, because we can always, Linda says we can run and get her, but.
it's okay.
Okay, so number 4 is R277468, the parent guardian review of public education curriculum and review of complaint process. My understanding is this is an amendment and continuation, and it's up for its 5-year. Jeff, what do we need to know?
Yes, so this rule is 5 years old, so happy birthday, and we are
Aw.
here to continue it. It's a very short and simple rule. It essentially requires the LEAs involve parents in their curriculum review process, as well as a complaint review process when they the LEAs receive complaints about curriculum. So it's really just asking that parents be involved in both steps.
Okay.
We did make some formatting changes to bring it up to compliance with the rule writing manual. That's
Were there any other substantive changes that?
nothing overly substantive. We did lighten a little bit toward the end on line 63 down to 70. There were some requirements in the rule that required that the state board retain particular types of resources. We lightened that to just say that LEAs can request resources of the board. We do try to avoid putting in rule self-imposed requirements because we can just do it anyway. So we rather would like to make it an LEA-facing rule, so the LEAs can request those resources from us, and we will be prepared to.
Any
I
questions
just have
from?
a quick one. So the way this is written now, the LEA shall involve a parent. So we just have one parent that needs to be involved to look at instructional materials and complaints.
So the way that the rule writing manual also goes is we're supposed to write in the singular, not the plural, wherever possible. So although we are saying an LEA shall involve a parent, they can involve more than one.
I know they can, but they would satisfy the rule by just bringing in one parent to look at instructional materials.
They would.
And they would say, okay, is that really what we intend? It was involve parents before, and that's a change. Is that a reason?
It was just to bring it into the writing.
Make it consistent with the style, right?
Oh, bring
But
it
if that was
in
something-
consistency with style is changing the rule. Is what it's doing. Before we had to have at least 2, now we're down to 1. Is that if I was somebody looking from the outside, I'd think you could pick a parent who would agree, take the sex education stuff or something like that, curriculum.
Yeah, I think
one.
that would be, how hard is it
Yeah,
to
we could change.
make it
Yeah.
plural? Or is that just
We can switch
really?
it back if you're more comfortable with that.
I
That's not a
think-
problem with me.
It sounds like we'd be more comfortable with
Does
making
that
it
make more
plural.
sense to do it? I understand the style, but I think that we've changed the
Yeah.
substance by doing the style.
It
I think
changes
it's
the law.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But then is 2 parents enough?
Well, I
guess.
couldn't we just say we'll involve parents?
It's
I know
more than
that.
one.
Let's get the style.
Yeah, we can make that one for.
But I
There's
think
always
that it's-
needs for
Well,
exceptions.
Pat.
So that's line 53, you want to do the same thing on line 56?
53 and 56.
So I'll just make it consistent throughout the rule.
Make it consistent, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That,
Yep.
so
Good
I'll
question.
move that we adopt the rule with the changes made to lines 53 and 56 to change a parent to parents.
Okay, so
And then
the,
make the rest of it grammatically correct, I guess.
so the motion before the committee is to approve R277468 with the amendment of lines 53 and 56 to change a parent to parents and then make it consistent throughout the document. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, I think, unless I'm wrong, we are on our last item, is that correct? Would somebody go
Yeah,
get?
we already got it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's coming.
You guys are 500 steps ahead of everything. Okay, so where did Ashley, did Ashley go get her?
Oh, so Ashley's who I texted. So
I will text Linda.
Oh, Linda, we need Linda and
I will let
Okay.
her know.
So poor Ashley
We
just
can talk
barely
about
left.
desserts again if you guys.
Stop. That just made me all fuddled in my brain and now I'm thinking about sugar.
Last one.
Computer science, right?
Okay,
Yes.
well, our last item is, where's Ashley? Oh, let me find it in my little thing.
Ashley.
Ashley, just when you left, you knew we were gonna.
No, I was just setting up my Zoom meeting.
Oh, gosh.
I was like, go start without me.
Okay, so we are on, I'm really not on item number 1, action item 1, K through 5 computer science standards request for approval. As you remember, we had a big discussion about this last month. Staff has gone through it, done some great work. Ashley, why don't you tell us about it? Go from there.
Okay, Sarah's gonna be my driver on my PowerPoint
She's
since
a
my
good
computer's upstairs. So we're just gonna kind of give you a feedback or kind of a timeline of where we started, where we are now, and then where we're going.
Okay, great.
So first and foremost, our vision for computer science. I'm not going to read that because I'm out of breath running from the second floor down. But we want this going by 2022. So with the task force in June of 2018, they had some recommendations. This is just kind of where we're at. We've already completed the statewide K-12 computer science framework. We're in the process of starting the early at elementary with the K-5 standards, as well as improving upon scaffolding of the computer science standards, and then we're still working on the communication, as well as making sure that every student has access to the 19 computer science courses, 33 in total if you include the IT courses. So that's where our process is right now. So with the K-5 standards, I'm going to kind of go over the design process of how we got to where we are now, the key updates on it, as well as what our next steps will be. So the design process for the standards is we met back in March. We met with Utah teachers, principals, administration, as well as university experts to develop this based off of the framework, as well as the K-12 computer science standards, as well as what these experts felt were what was needed for Utah. In that process, we took each strand and we looked at them in different iterations. We divided them up into grade band. We looked at what criteria was, as well as how it related, and then we revised in that process. And then some of the key updates. So after our last meeting, we had some feedback and looked at items from NASB, as well as we worked with staff to make sure they aligned with science, language arts, math. And then we've incorporated those comments and suggestions into the documents. And then we actually this week began working on the 612 computer science standards. So it's been a crazy busy week, but these are them. It was way fun. They were awesome. It was awesome. So the next steps are, we have the computer science standards that we're asking to go to full board for approval. And then we will be working with teaching and learning with math science to start creating the core guides that will align to the standards to help develop how teachers will be teaching these standards in the classroom. Okay. Questions?
Yeah, any questions from
I have a question on
Yes.
starting with the vision.
Okay.
It wasn't clear to me, and maybe you can show it there. It says each student in secondary public schools will have access to robust and varied computer science courses by 2022. So what's the real goal? We're going to have all these courses in place for freshmen or sophomores in high school by 2022, or the seniors in 2022 will have had access to at least one of these courses, or what? I'm just trying to get my head around that. What does that mean?
So the interesting thing is we already have computer science at the secondary level in means of grades 9 through 12. So it was kind of like we were top heavy and didn't have anything in the lower grades. So we're kind of working our way backwards and creating it from K-5, and then from there working from 6-12, because there's already items in the secondary level where there's really not in the K-5 level. Okay. So as we start to create the K-5 and work back up to what we already have, to make that alignment so that we have not only a K-12 but a K-16 for post-secondary as well.
So what does that first sentence mean?
So each student in secondary public schools will have access to robust and varied computer science courses by 2022. So what we're anticipating is that by 2022, starting in kindergarten all the way up, students will have access, because that's the big thing, is that based off of geographic locations, it's kind of I'm lucky if I get computer science because I have a teacher that's interested in it and wants to try it out, instead of having the opportunity to actually take that.
But from what you said, we're compliant with that right now, right?
No.
You said that every secondary student has CS courses, right, in high school.
So I think what, to differentiate, because I appreciate your question, Board Member Hanson. So in regards to the fact that do we have courses and current standards is what Ashley was speaking to in 6 through 12. In regards to do those classes exist and are they offered at every single high school, that answer is no. And so part of this effort is to make sure that every single high school as well as middle school has an opportunity for students to engage in computer science.
Okay, so by 2022, what's going to happen in our secondary schools, which is that first sentence?
That every high school.
So this is specific to the K-12 computer science business case that's being considered. So the rule actually just passed associated with the issuance of planning grants, and so that's our first step, is to be able to have planning grants available for the LEAs to be able to convene their stakeholders to say, if my goal is to be able to have classes available in every secondary space, what does that look like at a local level, and to make a plan for that. Then the request for legislative funding for this upcoming cycle would then provide LEAs the resources to be able to implement and achieve that vision by the 2022 deadline.
So that first sentence means that in these rural schools where there may not be courses offered, by 2022 that will be on their course offering list.
Correct.
Okay, I get that.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. And then I had, so I read through the, what's it called here? This was tough, especially because of this new program that we have to play with. So this computer software is not helping us on the computer software. But all the practices that we have, it would be helpful for me, and I understand, and I apologize, I missed last month. I was out of town. But for some of these you included, like this one, artifacts, practice 5, right at the end, and computational artifacts was new to me. I didn't understand what that meant. At the end of it you put examples of computational artifacts include program simulations, and so after I saw that, every time I saw artifacts, I know what it is. It's a computer program, right, or an app. Okay, on the others, I'm still not so clear on abstractions. Is there a way we could put an example on each of these?
Yeah.
That would say what it is?
So are you talking about like at the very beginning of the document?
Of the
like
practices.
Core practices, absolutely.
Yeah, the core practices. I think that would help, because this is for teachers who aren't teaching computer science right now, right? They're probably as dumb as me about this stuff. And that would, I think, be helpful if we had an example of what each of those practices were. And then my next question, I thought that the standards themselves looked awesome. Like, you guys have done a lot of work.
Thank you.
But where it references the practices in each of them, I had a hard time tying some of those back and saying, is this really the practice that's most relevant? And maybe you can help me on that. I'm just looking at the very first one, standard KCS1. select computing devices that perform a variety of tasks accurately and quickly based on user needs and preferences. And then it says, the practice that we're referencing is fostering an inclusive computing culture. And I couldn't make that connection.
So, sorry.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So I think the next thing to know is that in the next steps, there is another document that's going to come that will be attached to this that are called core guides, which will help teach or help teachers understand how they're going to be implementing that into their classroom, which will have more detail than just what the standard is.
But can you help me understand how that's inclusive?
Of course,
the selecting a device?
Yep, it's a great question because I think, especially the word inclusive, you know, can mean a lot of different components. So in this particular standard, the selection of the computing device that you are going to choose is also based on your user preferences and needs, and that those are different by individual. So a really kind of high-level example that I can give is that when choosing a particular app, I know that I select an app based on its ability to get me answers quickly. So when I use my apps, I want my Google Maps to be able to do it quickly. Google Maps drives my father insane because the text isn't large enough for him to be able to see it clearly. And so he would select a different app that I think is less reliable, but it's really based on being able to make a selection based on your individual user preferences. So when we identify that as fostering an inclusive computing culture, it's the fact that we don't want to have applications and technology that only meets the needs of a single identified component of the population, but instead is broader.
So I get that still, but still help me. So it says below, students will select computing devices, and it lists as examples phone, tablet, computer, camera. And I'm thinking from this list, it's, okay, you want to make a call. What do you use? This is kindergarten. You use your camera? No, you use the phone, right? I just don't see how that ties to that part. And I'm all for this, but I think it should be easy for the teachers to identify, you know, this is how the practice ties into the standard. If we want to reference them that way, I mean, we could just take them out and say, here's the standard, and these are the practices in general that we want to look at. But and I'm not trying to beat anybody up, I just can't see that. I think that's a stretch to say you're going to pick between these 3 or 4 devices, and that has anything to do with, I mean, it's individual preference, I guess, but nobody's going to pick up, you know, this device to make a call when it won't make calls. You know.
I'm hoping you'll speak to the core guides. And
and again, so once these have been approved, when we get those core guides are the in-depth of how it would look in a classroom. So these standards, we're giving them a snapshot of what it's like, and then that core guide goes more in-depth and gives them more examples of how it is actually used
So
in
for
the
example,
classroom.
what would the core guide say for that one?
So in this particular case, I think what we're also talking about is, so one of the key components in fostering an inclusive computing culture is actually also the fact that we have technology that's available for individuals that may have different impairments or disabilities. And so, you know, recognizing that if I am, you know, looking to select a particular, I guess I keep going back to application because that's going to be the one I'm most familiar with.
But that's not one of the things that's here. This is just talking about basic devices when they're.
Yeah, so when our writers, when we started with the framework statements, each of our framework statements actually incorporates a practice as well as a core concept. And so that was the kind of foundation. We asked our writers to go through and say, does this practice make the best sense here, or should we alter it for something else? In working through the process with the teachers, this is also the one that they identified in terms of that incorporation. So similarly, in terms of the core guides that Ashley's referencing, we would look to those teachers as well to help us in terms of creating a really robust example for that setting based on their expertise as well.
And I think Patty had a response for you as well.
And perhaps it might help by thinking about the horizontal and vertical alignment that goes along with this. So if we're looking at it as a kindergarten, this is a first step for them to be able to look at it. And a kindergartner's world is me, and so perhaps their social context is much smaller than you would anticipate. So they're really kind of looking at me, and then perhaps someone else across the room speaking to what Sarah just said. So if we were to look at kindergarten KCS1, it talks about choosing the appropriate device, and at points they'll probably, what would I choose, and here's some of those things that go along with it, or what would my neighbor choose. If we look at one CS1, then it talks about operating, and then it talks about different devices. So it's building upon it. So it may not make as much sense right in the very beginning about that social relationship to it, but in kindergarten, their social context is them. And so it kind of speaks to that, and that's why you might think it is making such a large leap as to where it goes,
Superintendent.
If I could just add to that, so I visited a kindergarten classroom, I visited a school, the district will remain unnamed, but this school was very high-tech and very tech-focused. And in kindergarten, they were using both some devices and some software in mathematics instruction. And I was struck by a couple of little gals who they came from homes where their primary language was Spanish. And it was one of those devices where there's a camera, and it would give the student clues on the software when they were manipulating shapes, if they were doing it correctly or incorrectly, and then also giving them clues about how to manipulate the shapes. And there were 2 or 3 kiddos that were so frustrated by that, and I thought, okay, to the teacher, what concept are you trying to teach them, where they were so caught up and bound by that particular tool? And for some kiddos, they were just taking to it, and it really, it was intuitive for them. And you could tell that they were kids who had been on a device that was a drag and drop, and they navigated it without much help. And I watched the frustration level of others. So were there other tools that those kids could have been using? Now, maybe they didn't need a technology tool at all. Maybe it would have just been better to have a piece of paper next to them and place the manipulatives right on top of the paper or something. But I think in this, I hear what Board Member Hanson is totally saying, and the connection for me, maybe we can be more explicit in the language with the connection and the guides, but the language is about differentiation for the teacher. Part of it is, so this is a question I have that any of you can answer. When we look at the standards, it's what the student is supposed to do. The practices also incorporate some expectations for teachers. So the guide even is a more granular level of helping teachers know how to differentiate. So I was a guest in the classroom, but if I were a coach in the classroom, I would have been working with a teacher on recognizing frustration levels in students and providing different tools for students depending on what they needed to get the math concept, instead of focusing on here's just one tool or one piece of technology. So I think especially we continue to see that differentiation is a struggle. So in the space of the use of whatever tool to help teach students the components of computer science, which is mathematical reasoning and logic and creative thinking and problem solving and all those things, where teaching computer science can be a tool to get to those, or those lead up to better computing as they get older. And so I hear what you're saying, Board Member Hanson, because I think it can be confusing between the standards and the practices and the guides. So I'm wondering if there's a way to, this body is trying to push through the standards. So I need help understanding the board's role in the practices. Do you feel like that's part of the standard? Is the practice part of the standard, or is it something separate from the standard?
I think it is, because the practice using praxis, and I've said it the last 2 days at the 612.
It's easier to say.
I know. So the practice and the concept is what created the standard.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that's really helpful.
Okay.
I was just trying to make sense of the linkage.
Yeah.
Chair Graviet, so I grab it.
Graviet. I don't know why you should have called it Graviet.
She said Graviet.
I'm Brecken Higgins, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
That is so Graviet.
I like Genevieve.
That is, I don't know if there's a way to work on that, but I just think it's clear that there's this
Yeah.
Like there's a stream of content,
Because I
making
see
it real, and then granular help.
Right.
And I think that's a good distinction, if I can. I'm looking at, at another one, and as I look through these, that's why I brought it to you, is because I couldn't understand it well, but I'm looking at Standard 1 CS2. Explore the functions of common hardware and software components of computing systems. And then the practice 6, testing and refining computational artifacts. When I went back and read that, it was about debugging code and stuff like that. And I don't see, this is just if you look at the examples, it's talking about here's a mouse, here's a keypad, all that. I couldn't see the link between those. And I thought, if I'm a first grade teacher, I'm looking at this and this is the practice I'm supposed to use, I didn't see how that connected. If there's something that we can do in the implementation guide that explains that better for the teachers, great. But I'm focused on the standard. That makes sense. That's a good first grade standard. Here's the parts of the computer. Here's how that goes together. But I can't see how you tie in this software debugging stuff when you're talking to kids about that.
I really appreciate that. I think part of this is our presentation, because so the practices are a component that exists across K-12. And so that language itself oftentimes is speaking to some of the higher order components. And I think that's, if I'm catching
that
that
may very well be it.
Yeah,
later on the focus may go from hardware to software. And we're talking about that. But then does it make sense to have it here in the first grade standard and referenced?
Yeah, so an option, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, the trigger had
Well, it's I don't know why it's, hello, down there. I'm wondering if maybe this would help Board of Hanson feel more helpful if, when you bring the core guide back to us, it could address certain specific things you're worried about, so we make sure the teachers understand. Because I see the standards as, like Superintendent Dixon was saying, this is what the students need to know.
Mm-hmm.
But we also want to make sure the teachers know how to teach it properly, and so maybe we can include in the core guide, the following things. We can have vocabulary, we can have best, practices, things like that, and that would be something we could review when it comes back.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's a standard or an appropriate place to put it, but I
was going to potentially suggest that maybe instead of listing out the full practice name, if we maybe came up with a different way of denoting that practice, at least within that standard set, because we do define all of the practices at the start of the document. And that maybe it is that more technical, like, terminology within the practice that could be creating the confusion. So if we maybe listed like the practices numerically or in a shortened format, if that would alleviate some of the confusion.
My issue or concern, I guess, is that if the practice is listed there, that there should be a link between the standard and that practice somehow. And some of them I just didn't see. Some of them are clear. You can see it. I wondered if the practice might belong in the guide, the teacher's guide. The practice, define the practices in the standard, lay them all out, list examples, but then the link, put that in the teaching guide and say, this is what we're trying to teach, and this one, this practice is related to testing and refining computational artifacts, but in the lower grades, at the lower levels, we're going to talk mostly about hardware, and the software part's not going to be emphasized.
And part of the inclusion of the practice, just from a kind of starting off level with the framework, is that when we started very early on in standards development, not in computer science, but just in general as an agency, a lot of our standards were very specific to students will know. Or students will define. And it was very, very content heavy. And that, through learning science, we know that it needs to be more than just I can spit out a definition, but instead that I have an opportunity to apply that knowledge. And that's where we, as an agency, have tried to bring those practices more so to the forefront, so that we're helping teachers understand it's not about just a single direct instruction, this is how you define this term, but instead, so now that you know that definition, how can you, apply it and use it? And that was, at least just for background, kind of what we were going for.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. it's late in the day. I won't belabor this
No, it's
anymore.
good.
That's
No,
my,
it's-
yeah.
I think, Linda, did you have a comment?
I'll just make a motion that we approve the K-5 computer science standards, the standards portion, and then ask that they bring back the, what do they call it?
The core guides.
The core guides for us to make sure that it's all in sync. Is that possible? And send the standards to the board for their approval.
Okay, so the motion for the committee is to approve the K through 5 computer science standard, not science. Yes, computer science, I got confused on science. Computer science standards, draft 3, and to make sure you bring the core guide back, we can look at it and discuss that more in depth. So any discussion to that motion? Janet?
I haven't had a chance to weigh in on this yet, so I've been waiting. Last month I read a whole lot of computer science standards, and I think Utah has done a really fine job, and so hats off to you. There are a couple of things. I made some suggestions, and the staff kindly looked into them and accepted some of them. There were reasons the others weren't accepted that I understand. I just want you to look at the document KNI2. This is just a typo that I thought.
Okay.
Computing systems, where am I?
Okay,
I2.
Create patterns to communicate a message.
To create patterns is duplicated, doesn't it say? At least it did in the one I read. Students will use digital devices to create patterns patterns.
Okay. Yep.
And I just thought, you'll want to clean that up.
Okay, thank you.
And then down on KAP1, KAP1. So I did make a suggestion. So this is talking about algorithms, which, by the way, I repeated over and over, and I think I could even spell it now, algorithm. And the description underneath says students will complete a familiar process or activity by creating algorithms to follow specific instructions. My suggestion would be that we just add at the end, expose students to the term algorithm as they are sequencing events. Because that is essentially, an algorithm is a series of steps, and we're at a very basic level here. And I think they could do a lot of this without relating it to computer science. So I wondered about asking for that as a possible amendment.
So just to clarify, so at the end of the first sentence or at the start of the first sentence?
After drills, etc., just say expose students to the term algorithm as they are sequencing events.
Perfect.
Okay.
Great,
Sure.
we've got that.
Okay, we can keep that as an amendment.
Okay, that would be one amendment. And there was one other, let's see.
So Janet, do you want to make that motion?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to amend, it's an amendment to the motion?
So I'll make.
Did you say so moved?
Okay, I will move that as an amendment.
As an amendment to the motion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all those in favor of the amendment to the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good. That amendment passes.
And then the other thing that is in second grade, they were very kind to give me an option.
2 and 1.
Let's see. This income, where's network and internet?
2 NI1 is what you're looking at.
Yes, 2 NI1. And I'm trying to find it here. Here it is, 2 NI1. So they're talking here about passwords. And they were kind enough to include in there, let's see, students will be able to explain the reasoning behind having certain digital resources password protected and create an effective password and or passphrase with at least 2 of the following. So past phrases are typically 14 characters longer. They can have spaces in them. They can be just like a sentence like Dick and Jane see Spot run, something like that, a simple sentence, but it includes punctuation. It's easier to remember than a password and so forth. So my proposed amendment would be to remove, let's have kids create an effective password with at least 2 of the following, and then add at the bottom, students could also utilize a passphrase, comma, a phrase or sentence containing at least 14 characters with spaces between words. The use of punctuation, upper and lower cases in passphrases meets the complexity requirements for passwords, and they are easy to remember and harder to crack.
Pause. Would that be something that would go in a guide, that detail?
Yeah.
If you just have passphrase in the standards, I just wanted to clarify, would that work?
Because what we could also do is so my recommendation, if you want the detail in the core guide, we could end it at having certain digital resource passwords protected and create an effective password and or passphrase. And then period, and then in the core guide, we put all that additional information.
That works for me.
I think so.
Would you be willing to send us that?
Pardon me?
Will you send that to us, and that way we can.
Your recommendation.
Oh, send it.
I'm sorry, I didn't capture all of it.
That's right.
Sure, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
And I also have a little handout here about passphrases.
I actually handed that out at the 612 framework.
Oh, you did? Okay. Hey, someday they may be hacking those, and I was reading where one guy was saying, do part of a passphrase and then put your creepy password with all the things in there, and then do the rest of your passphrase, and that will just drive the hackers crazy.
So we do have an amendment to the motion. So the amendment to the motion is to add
The amendment to the motion would be to end the sentence in Standard 2, N1.1, after the words passphrase. And then recognizing that detail will be added in the guide.
Core guide.
Core guide.
Okay. So just to restate, the amendment to the motion is to, in Standard 2N1.1, to end, put a period after passphrase, and then to include the detailed information in the course guide.
Right.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're back to the original motion. Any other discussion? Okay, so the original motion is to forward to the board a recommendation to approve the K-5 Computer Science Standards draft, I guess it would be draft 4, or draft 4.
With changes.
As amended. And then we'll also ensure that the core guides include best teaching practices, vocabulary included, and some of the things we've discussed here.
And also there is the vocabulary at the end.
Right, you do have that. I'm sure that would also be incorporated into a core guide as well. Okay, because teachers love that. Okay, any discussion to the main motion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes, Ashley.
Happy Friday.
Oh, thanks so much.
I'll give her the
Oh, no, we don't have to do it.
I can't, I'm in a meeting right now that I'm not in. Thank you, guys.
Sorry.